Welcome back to the Tik-A Tee Method for week 23. In week 21, I introduced compound time signatures, specifically 6/8. In week 22, we took 6/8 to the next level by adding some more complex rhythms. Well, as promised here for week 23, we're going to introduce two more compound time signatures, 9/8 and 12/8. So we're going to do some exercises in those time signatures. We're going to continue our conversation about compound time signatures and how to decipher rhythms and divide these beats into 3 equal parts with the dotted quarter note getting the beat and so forth and so on. If you haven't checked out week 21 and week 22's videos, it's really important that you do that before proceeding here because we're just taking things to the next level. So let's get started right now. Let's go do this. Here we are on the first page of week 23. If you recall back to week 21, I gave you a suggestion regarding compound time signatures and how to recognize them. If you see a time signature with a 6, a 9, or a 12, all numbers that are divisible by 3, on the top number of a time signature, regardless of what the bottom number is, you are more than likely in a compound time signature. For example, composers would rarely choose 6/8 as a simple time signature. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this, but I want to give you this one example. Let's think about 3/4. 3/4 has 3 quarter notes in the measure. Each quarter note gets the beat, and each one of those quarter notes is divided into 2 equal eighth notes. There are 6 eighth notes in a 3/4 measure. Now let's think about 6/8. There are 6 eighth notes in a 6/8 measure as well. The dotted quarter note is getting the beat in most cases in 6/8, and that's equally divided into 3 equal parts. So why would a composer choose 3/4 over 6/8 or vice versa? It all depends on where they want the pulse to land, where they want the metric accents to land. Much less common than this, 6/8 can also be thought of as a simple time signature, where each measure has 6 beats or 6 pulses, the eighth note in this case, and each one of those eighth notes is divided into 2 16th notes. However, that is much, much less common, which is why I gave you that advice. When you see a 6, a 9, or a 12 on the top number of a time signature, again, regardless what that bottom number is, more than likely it's going to be a compound time signature. Composers would rarely choose 6/8 as a simple time signature. They would rarely choose 9/8 or 12/8 as simple time signatures as well, which we're going to talk about in today's video. So I just wanted to give you this one example. I hope that it makes sense. There's a lot of math behind this, but you can see how simple time signatures versus compound time signatures could make all the difference in the world of how a composer would choose a time signature based on metric accents, divisions of beats, pulses, and so on. So what I'm introducing today, in my opinion, are the 3 most common compound time signatures that are used in music. 6/8, which is compound duple, 9/8, which is compound triple, and 12/8, which is compound quadruple. These, in my opinion, again, are the most common compound time signatures. Now let's break them down logically because it actually makes a lot of sense when we look at these. We know that duple means 2, triple means 3, and quadruple means 4. So when we have a compound duple time signature like 6/8, it simply means that there are 2 beats in the measure, the dotted quarter note gets the beat, each one of those dotted quarter notes is divided into 3 eighth notes. When we have compound triple, the only thing that's changing is we're adding a dotted quarter note to that measure. We're adding a pulse or a beat to the measure when it's 9/8, because now we have 9 eighth notes in that measure, or 3 dotted quarter notes. Therefore, logically, 12/8 is 4 beats in the measure, meaning that we have 4 dotted quarter notes in each of these 12/8 measures. Each of those dotted quarter notes is divided into 3 eighth notes, so we're going to have 12 eighth notes in each measure. So all we're doing in this week here for week 23 is adding a beat from what we already know in 6/8. 6/8, 2 beats, 9/8, 3 beats, and now 12/8, 4 beats. So this is the best way and the most logical way to make sense of these time signatures. It really does make it a lot easier to think about it this way. And as far as invisible bar lines are concerned, let's first look at 6/8 and 12/8, because these are both symmetrical time signatures, meaning we can put an invisible bar line right in the middle and divide each of those measures into 2 equal halves. And let's not forget what the intention of invisible bar lines are for. They are intended to help us better compartmentalize measures for our musicians. It definitely makes deciphering rhythms and sight reading a lot easier. Which brings me to 9/8, where we have two what I would call semi-invisible bar lines. If we can accommodate a musician so that they can see a dotted quarter note on beat 1, a dotted quarter note on beat 2, and a dotted quarter note on beat 3 without blurring those two invisible bar lines, then we should accommodate that. It's a little more difficult in 9/8. That's why I call them semi-invisible bar lines. But nonetheless, they still exist, and if we can help musicians compartmentalize the beats in any measure, in any time signature, it means better sight reading and it means better deciphering of rhythms, which will ultimately help with musical phrasing as well. And lastly, on this page, before we head to our first exercise for today's video, I want to talk about metric accents. Now, in week 21 and 22, we already talked about the metric accent for 6/8. It's on beat 1, with an insignificant or non-existent accent on beat 2. It sounds like this: ta, ta, ti, 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 and so forth and so on. So you can hear that accent on beat 1. Moving to 9/8, this has a very similar metric accent pattern to 3/4, to a waltz, with an accent on beat 1, and beats 2 and 3 are much smaller, almost insignificant accents. It sounds like this: ta, 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 ti, 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 and so forth and so on. You can sort of hear that waltz feel in this one just like you did in 3/4. And then moving to 12/8, and you probably already guessed it, this one has very similar metric accents to 4/4, with the main metric accent happening on beat 1, the second largest metric accent happening on beat 3, and then 2 and 4 are very, very small accents. So it would sound like this: ta, 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 ti, 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 ti. So you can probably hear the main metric accent in 12/8, just like it is in 4/4, is on beat 1, with the secondary metric accent in 12/8 being on beat 3. 2 and 4 are very, very small or almost insignificant metric accents. All right, now's the time that we go find some exercises. We're going to do one in 9/8 and one in 12/8. So let's go find our 9/8 exercise right now. And our 9/8 exercise for today is 23A. So let's analyze. In measure 1, we've got 3 dotted quarter notes. Those are the beats in 9/8. We know 9/8 is 3 beats per measure, and the dotted quarter note gets the beat. It's a compound triple time signature. Measure 2 is the division of those beats. So beat 1, 2, and 3 will be placed here. Each one of those dotted quarter notes is broken down into 3/8 notes. So in measure 1, we've got the beat note, and in measure 2, we've got the division of the beats. I hope that makes sense and that you can easily now see the representation of 9/8 between measure 1 and measure 2. Moving on to measure 3, we've got that really cool lilting rhythm, the dotted 8th to the 16th to the 8th note. It sounds like this: T-A-Tee, T-A-Tee. It's a really nice lilting rhythm that is really cool in compound time signatures. That's beat 1. Beat 2 are these 3/8 notes right here, and beat 3 lands on this dotted quarter rest. Now, let's look at measure 4. We have a whole rest in measure 4. Does a whole rest equal 3 dotted quarter notes? Mathematically, no, it does not. But publishers, as I mentioned in week 21, will often put a whole rest in a measure to represent a full measure rest. We as musicians can see a bar line, a whole rest, and a bar line, and know, regardless of what time signature we're in, it's going to be an entire measure of rest. Now, mathematically, if we wanted to write this correctly and maybe observe one of the invisible bar lines, we could write, for example, a dotted half rest followed by a dotted quarter rest. At least we're observing one of the invisible bar lines. If we wanted to observe both of the invisible bar lines, we could write a dotted quarter rest, a dotted quarter rest, and a dotted quarter rest. Now, When we see a measure filled with these rests, our brains want to compute. Okay, so the compartmentalization is there, yes, but is it easier to see a measure with a whole rest in it, knowing that that represents a full measure rest? Or is it easier for our brains to see a dotted half rest and a quarter rest, or 3 dotted quarter rests? The answer inevitably is the whole rest. That's why publishers use just a whole rest to represent an entire measure of silence regardless of the time signature. So there's a little explanation there. I hope it makes sense. Now, because we've got an entire measure of rest, what does that mean? Well, that means that we can be looking ahead to the next line, because in sight reading, we'll want to look ahead as much as we possibly can. So we want our eyes to look at the next line for measure 5. And in that first measure on the second line, measure 5, we've got an 8th rest on beat 1, another 8th rest on beat 2, and a quarter rest on beat 3. So if we look at beat 1 and I bracket beat 1, it's an 8th rest and then 2 8th notes. Beat 2, same exact thing, an 8th rest and then 2 8th notes. And beat 3, we've got a quarter rest and then that last 8th note. Here's what measure 5 would sound like with a 1-bar count off. 1, 2, 3, T, 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 T. Really kind of cool. We've got rests on all the beats, and then we've got some nice upbeat notes happening there in measure 5. Moving on to measure 6, we've got our nice, cool lilting rhythm here, that T-A Tee, T-A Tee, happening on beat 1. Beat 2 is this dotted quarter note, and beat 3 is this dotted quarter rest. Moving on to measure 7, we've got a dotted quarter note on beat 1. Then we have a tie going into beat 2, so I'm going to parenthesize beat 2 because we're not going to re-articulate that 8th note. Then beat 3 will be over these 3 8th notes. Then we've got a dotted half note. We know that a dotted half note gets 2 beats in 6/8, in 9/8, in 12/8. Whenever the dotted quarter note gets the beat, a dotted half note gets 2 beats. So I'm going to write 1 and 2 here. And we could even write -3 here over this dotted quarter rest to ensure that we're going to hold that dotted half note out full value. All right, there's some really cool rhythms here in exercise 23A. Let's get a metronome started, let's get a pitch, and let's vocalize this rhythm together. Okay, the first thing I want to do is clear the ink so we can see this exercise a little more clearly. You can see that I'm once again using the metronome from imusic-school.com. So again, thank you to the folks at that website for offering up a free online metronome. And you can see I'm at 62 beats per minute. That means in our case here, the dotted quarter note equals 62. I'll be singing this on a G3. You're welcome to join me on that pitch, an octave lower, an octave higher, or a different note altogether. But the idea is that you vocalize this exercise with me. Let's get the metronome started. And you can see that I've got our metronome set to 3 beats with a little bit of an accent on that first beat, which is representative of a metric accent here in 9/8. Here's my G3. I'm going to give us a 1-bar count off for the exercises today, and then we're off to the races. Here we go. 1, ready, and ta, 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 T, 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 ta, ta, T, 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 ta. All right, let's stop the metronome. You could hear that I held that dotted half note out all the way to beat 3. You can hear that metric accent happening on the downbeat of each measure. Now, what we need to do here, once we've completed an exercise, once we've vocalized it and sight-read it for the first time with a metronome and on a pitch, we need to go to my website and find the MP3 quote-unquote answer for exercise 23A. We need to know if we made any mistakes. Did we slow down? Did we speed up? Did we get any rhythms wrong? Or did we get it all right? Let's go find out together right now. And here we are at my website where you can find all 363 of the MP3s that accompany my book. We, of course, are looking at exercise 23A. Let's review our options here. Option number 1, just listen to the MP3 and check for your accuracy that way. Option number 2, vocalize along with the MP3. Or option number 3, and especially if your instrument is not primarily the voice, break out your instrument and play along with the MP3. Okay, choose your option because without further ado, I'm pressing play on exercise 23A right now. One, two, three, 1, ready, and ta 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 ti 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 a ti 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 a ti ta ta ti 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 ta. Okay, there you have it, exercise 23A. And just like for 6/8 for weeks 21 and 22, you can hear the primary pulse, that dotted quarter note, emphasized in the metronome that I created in Logic Pro. But I also threw in the subdivision slightly and at a lower volume in the metronome so you can hear those subdivisions. Okay, before moving on to the next exercise or next rhythmic concept, it's really important that if you did not choose option 3, which is playing this exercise on your instrument, you need to do that before proceeding. One, two, three, 1, ready, and. Okay, let's move on to our next exercise. Let's do one in 12/8 with exercise 23G. Let's first talk about 12/8. What is it? It's a compound quadruple time signature, meaning that there are 4 beats in each measure. The dotted quarter note will get the beat or the pulse, and each one of those dotted quarter notes is divided into 3 equal eighth notes, meaning that there will be 12 eighth notes in this measure. Okay, so let's analyze exercise 23G right now. Here we go. Measure 1, we've got the beat note. So all 4 of these beats in 12/8 will be those dotted quarter notes. And you can guess what I did in measure 2. It's the division of those beat notes. So here's beat 1, here's beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. This helps you visualize between measure 1 and measure 2, 12/8 very nicely. Moving on to measure 3. We have beat 1 here over these 3 eighth notes, beat 2 over this eighth note. Then we've got a quarter rest after that. An eighth note plus a quarter rest is equal to 3 eighth notes. So that's all of beat 2. Beat 3 will happen over these 3 eighth notes, and then beat 4 over those 2 eighth notes with that eighth rest finishing off the beat. The last measure in this line, we've got an eighth rest on beat 1, then we've got a quarter note, dotted quarter note on beat 2, and then a dotted half rest on beats 3 and 4, giving us that opportunity to look ahead to that next measure. And in measure 5, we've got a dotted quarter rest on beat 1. Beat 2 is this dotted quarter note. Beat 3, another dotted quarter rest. And beat 4, another dotted quarter note. Measure 6 is just the inverse of measure 5. So we've got the dotted quarter note happening first, then the dotted quarter rest, then the dotted quarter note, and then followed and finished off on beat 4 with this dotted quarter rest. So in measure 5, we've got beats 2 and 4 happening with those dotted quarter notes. And on measure 6, we've got the dotted quarter notes happening on beats 1 and 3. All right, let's move on to measure 7. On beat 1, we have T, Tik-A Tee, and we went over these rhythms in week 22. So if you haven't checked out that video, it's really important that you go do that. In beat 2, we've got T, T, T. In beat 3, we've got T, T, Tik-A. Then on beat 4, we've got a dotted quarter note tied over the bar line into the first beat of measure 8. I'm going to parenthesize beat 1 in measure 8 because we're not going to re-articulate that 8th note. Then beat 1 is finished off with those 2 8th notes. Beats 2, 3, and 4 are these dotted quarter notes right here. So we've got 3 dotted quarter notes finishing off measure 8. All right, there's some really cool measures here in exercise 23G. And just to repeat again what 12/8 is, we've got 4 beats in the measure. We've got a dotted quarter note getting each one of these beats, and each one of those dotted quarter notes is broken down into 3 8th notes. All right, we've analyzed exercise 23G. You know what time it is. We need to go put a metronome on, find a pitch, and vocalize this exercise together. Let's do it. Here we go. And the first thing I want to do is clear the ink so we can see the exercise a little more clearly. Then I'm going to go over to my metronome here, and I'm going to change the number of beats from 3 to 4 so that we have 4 beats. I'm going to keep the stress on the first beat here checked so that beat 1 will have a strong accent. We'll know where beat 1 is in each measure. And I'm going to stay at 62 beats per minute for this exercise, meaning, again, that the dotted quarter note equals 62. I'll once again be singing this on a G3 as well. Let's get the metronome started. Here we go. There it is. Here's the note I'll be singing the exercise on. And I'm going to give a 1-bar count off, and I hope that you'll vocalize exercise 23G with me. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and ta, 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 T, 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 ta, 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 T, Tik-A Tee, T, 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 Tik-A ta, T, T, ta, ta, ta. Okay, let's stop that metronome. There's a lot of fun rhythms in exercise 23G. I hope that you vocalized along with me, because right now we're going to go to my website, we're going to find the MP3 quote-unquote answer for this exercise and see if we did it right. Here we are back at my website, and we are all queued up for exercise 23G. You know what your 3 options are, so make a decision because I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to press play on exercise 23G right now. One, 2, 3, 4. Ta, 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 T, 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 ta, 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 T, Tik-A Tee, T, 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 Tik-A ta, T, T, ta, ta, ta. Okay, there's exercise 23G. So maybe we made some mistakes, maybe we didn't, maybe we got it all right. I think when I performed it, I might have been dragging or slowing down a little bit. But either way, I think we got all the rhythms right now. The question is, did you perform exercise 23G on your instrument? If you have not done that yet, please do that now before moving on. One, 2, 3, 4. And that does it for week 23. Thank you so much for joining me. But please keep in mind that these videos are only intended to be supplemental resources to my book. There are so many more practice exercises in 9/8 and 12/8 that you could and should be doing. In week 23, there's also a little cool section in my book that talks about shuffle feel or swing feel, comparing 12/8 to 4/4, a nice little jazzy section in my book that you won't find in any of these videos. But you will find it in my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, the Tik-A Tee Method. You can find it at my website, roncastingway.com. You can also find it on Amazon and at jwpepper.com. And while you're at Amazon, check out my store, Ron Castingway Music. There's a lot of great resources there for music professionals, educators, and students alike. And I hope you'll help out the channel. Please hit that like and subscribe button and that notification bell so you get the latest video. And if you have a comment or a question, please leave it below. I will reply to any and all comments. I am super excited for week 24 when I finally introduce triplets, a borrowed division. I hope you'll join me then. So, in the meantime, go out and practice all of your compound time signatures, 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8, and I will see you in week 24.